Today on the show,
you get a clear picture where they're coming from. Actually, it increases the chances that you're going to make no concessions whatsoever.
the art of negotiation. Welcome to the Not Another Real Estate Investing Podcast. I'm Dan Riando. Really excited about today's interview. Chris Voss is an American businessman and author. He wrote the book Never Split the Difference, Negotiating as If Your Life Depended on It. And that title is particularly applicable to Chris's life because before he became a business negotiating trainer, he was an FBI hostage negotiator for more than 20 years. He helped to free people that were kidnapped by terrorists, murderers, and others all around the world. And you might wonder just how similar hostage negotiation is to business negotiation. Chris says there's really no difference, and he's applied the lessons he learned at the FBI to the business world. And that's why Brian and I interviewed him a few days ago to see how he could teach you how to be better when you're trying to make that deal. We started the interview by asking Chris how he got from being an FBI negotiator to a business negotiator.
Well, I mean, the process of becoming a hostage negotiator, I had to volunteer on a crisis hotline in New York City because I was, as I like to say, I was eminently unqualified to become a hostage negotiator. And while I was volunteering on the hotline, we didn't call it emotional intelligence at the time, or it wasn't really well defined because this was in the early 90s. But I was just blown away at the effectiveness of the skills. And I was thinking, this has got to apply to everything. It's not just crisis, but all communication. So I always started trying to apply this stuff to my personal and professional life very early on from day one. If it worked, think cool, it works. If somehow I felt like it didn't work, I figured really more it was a mistaken application than a mistake in using the wrong tool. And so I just always felt that way. As I developed it over the years, I was constantly using it all the time in my business and personal life. I was constantly using negotiation techniques on people at work, on other FBI agents, on hostage negotiators, on bosses, on people that we arrested, just in everything. And then finally, we had a kidnapping that didn't work out so well. And I decided, I thought, okay, we did everything we knew how to do. We got to go outside. If we were inadequate in this kidnapping and we did all we know, then the answer is to get better. That's when I went to Harvard, and they let me go through the negotiation course at the law school. And those guys up there were brilliant. They said, you're doing the same thing we're doing. It's just the stakes that are different. And that was really when I got outside validation of something I thought all along, that it was a highly effective skill set that was applicable to all interactions.
Can you expand on that just a little bit, about what is similar in negotiating a deal, for example, or negotiating in a kind of crisis scenario? Give me maybe two or three of those skills that you think are very similar.
Yeah, well, a couple things. First of all, every human being has the same basic wiring in their brain. It's called the limbic system. Most of us know that everybody's got an amygdala. Amygdala is one of the components of the limbic system. Since neuroscience has come along and we can actually look inside the brain and watch it interact, we know how the limbic system works in terms of positive and negative emotions and where they reside in the brain and the subsequent reactions they cause and a releasing of chemicals into our body. Those chemicals are dopamine, serotonin, cortisol, which is a stress hormone. And most people are familiar with endorphins and endorphin highs, those sorts of things. So there's some basic functioning that exists because we're humans, just the same way as the respiratory system. Everybody's got a respiratory system. Doesn't matter what your gender or ethnicity is. The additional science that's come along in hostage negotiation, we always knew that our bad guy was motivated by some sense of loss someplace, and it was our job to find the loss and then diffuse it. We found that out through the 70s, 80s, and 90s. In about 2002, Daniel Kahneman won the Nobel Prize in behavioral economics, saying that all human behavior is most influenced by fear of loss, not just crisis behavior, but all, ALL. Which is your normal functioning behavior, your day-to-day interactions, your interactions with your family, all your business interactions. Your brain is first. Decision-making is impacted by fear of loss. Lo and behold, hostage negotiators, we learned how to look for the loss and diffuse the loss from way back when. We didn't know it was all behavior. We thought it was crisis behavior. The other thing neuroscience has showed us unequivocally is that basically calling out negatives reduces them on their impact on the brain. Not some of the time, all the time. Now, the only difference is it doesn't guarantee you your degree of impact. You may have to go work to reduce a negative with the appropriate calling out of it more than once. And frequently, it requires more than one. And people misinterpret calling out a negative. If you don't get to where you want to go, they say, well, that didn't work. No, the answer is you just need to do it more. It did work. You just need more. So neuroscience and Daniel Kahneman has told us that the rules that hostage negotiations were taught to live by is actually all human behavior, not just crisis behavior.
Can you give an example of calling out a negative?
Sure. And what we like to do is we like to inoculate from negatives. So if you and I have a business deal and I got a proposition that you're not going to like, I will call you on the phone and I will say, I got a lousy proposition for you. And then I'm going to go dead silent. And I'm not going to proceed until you give me some sort of indicator that you're ready to hear it. Now, what your brain is going to do is, because you're wired to be negative, you're going to imagine worse than anything I could say. I know it's going to happen every time. The most extreme answer I've ever heard of was one person I was coaching in my MBA class at USC. Their counterpart said, then why make it at all? Now, that was a negotiation over equity in a company, and the person that opened the negotiation said, I got a lousy proposition for you. They wanted a 10% stake for their spouse in the company because the spouse was working really hard to help. And at that point in time, it was a 50-50 business. And one might say, all right, so if you want 10%, you're going to ask for 20. Maybe you're going to ask for 25. You know, the traditional negotiation advice that the academics would have, most of the academics would have you believe is high anchor high and go first, and then split the difference, settle for what you actually want. Well, instead, with this reverse approach of calling out the negative, she said, I got a lousy proposition for you. The 50-50 counterpart came back with, then why make it at all? They proceeded through the negotiation, and instead of getting 10% for her spouse, she got a third of the company for her spouse.
A quick question. Out of all the negotiating tactics, what do you feel is the most effective strategy or the most important aspect to any negotiation so that you can achieve your goal on your end?
Yeah, it's going to be the tactical application of empathy. I mean, empathy is just another way of really using emotional intelligence. And if we start working with the way the brain works, my real issue is not, are we going to come to agreement? My real issue is what's going to happen after we come to an agreement. That's why we say yes is nothing without how. There's no shortage of deals that people back out of, implement poorly, or resentful over the original agreement. And so they're going to go sideways everything they can. I mean, in real estate, especially, anybody that's experienced in real estate knows that signing an agreement is no guarantee that the property title is going to change hands. Opening escrow is no guarantee that the property title is going to change hands. And if one side is unhappy with the deal as agreed to, then any opportunity they can to go sideways, fail to implement, use an inspection as an excuse for not going through, it's a cliche. I don't know a single person involved in real estate that thinks that signing an agreement means the deal is going to close. It's what happens after the agreement is signed that depends upon whether or not the deal is going to close. So knowing that, since I know there's going to be problems in the implementation of the deal, I'm going to use every advantage I can up front, first of all, to eliminate problems before they happen and to eliminate implementation problems as we go through, because everybody has second thoughts.
You know, a lot of people enter a negotiation thinking, okay, I know what I want. Hell or high water, I'm going to come out of this thing getting what I want. But I think what you're trying to say here is that you got to really think about and empathize with the other person and think about what they want too, and not just try and, well, for lack of a better word, just try and screw them as hard as you can.
Yeah, you know, and let's not confuse empathy with sympathy. That's the real first step for the mercenary negotiator. Now, Daniel Goleman, in his last book that I know that he wrote, although it's been so long since Focus came out, he may have written something else. He said there's three kinds of empathy. And one of them is he refers to as cognitive empathy, which is the same as Harvard Law School defines empathy, same as the FBI hostage negotiators do, which is simply getting a clear bead on where the other side is coming from, completely understanding it, not agreeing it, And Bob Mnookin, who wrote a book called Beyond Winning, actually said, and he's the head of the program on negotiation at Harvard. Bob Mnookin said, empathy is not even about being nice. It's not about liking or disagreeing or agreeing. It's just a clear picture of where the other side's coming from. You get a clear picture of where they're coming from, actually it increases the chances that you're going to make no concessions whatsoever, or that you'll come up with a better deal. The problem with knowing what you want is it gives you tunnel vision, and there's a really good chance you miss a better deal.
What information do you need to get about the other side before you?
Well, you need to just get a rough idea based on the context of where they're probably coming from. And everybody's got great instincts for this. They just have a tendency to ignore them. Like if you were to sit down and think, what are all the other things that I don't want the other party to think or feel about me? You know, if I got the chance, what would I want to deny? There's always going to be things, even at the beginning of an interaction. You know, they're going to think a guy like me is out to rip them off. They're going to think I'm a fast buck, you know, wham, bam, thank you, ma'am type of person, where I'm just going to take them I'm going to shear them like sheep. And I'm going to forget that I ever met them. I mean, you know, the context of any negotiation, you know, some people refer to this as baggage. You know, there's baggage walking in. I think Camp liked to talk about baggage. In his book, Start With No. Somebody did. I can't remember who it was. All right, so if I know that's there, and I know the way the human being works, and I know that that baggage is going to be more of an impediment than the profit is going to be an inducement. Now I know from hostage negotiation and neuroscience how to diffuse that baggage. I'm just going to call it out at the very beginning, because the neuroscience tells us the mere identification of negatives diffuses them. They've watched the electrical activity in the negative part of the brain go down just by calling the negatives out. And so if I'm lazy, and I want to spend the least amount of time negotiating so I can get into implementation, I'm going to call the negatives out from the very beginning, because it's going to get me to the possibilities a lot faster.
Hey, Chris, so for a real estate investor, probably the most common conversation a lot of guys will have is they will send out a piece of direct mail. They'll send out a postcard or a letter. It says, I'd love to buy your house. Please give me a call back at this number if you're interested in selling. And then you get the call back, and it's basically 50% of the time it's, okay, you want to buy my house. How much do you want to pay me? Without really even knowing anything about real estate. I don't know how far you've ever gone into that. In your best, if you had to approach that conversation, how would you handle a call like that? And where would you kind of lead that conversation?
All right. Well, I do a lot of things. First of all, I pretty much guarantee you that I make some tweaks in the letter that went out in the first place. It's a little bit counter to what a lot of people think. I had one guy that was in real estate say, you know, I can tell you something. I spend so much time getting to know the other side, and I just have so much trouble getting them to return my calls and my emails. And I said, that's exactly your problem. And he said, what? I said, yeah, you get to know them, but how do they get to know you? And the simplest, quickest hack is, in your letter, the first line should be, my name is X, period. Now, some people do that, but no last name, no title, nothing else. You want to be known as by first name only. And then at some point in time in a letter, drop in just a little bit of personal information about yourself. Just so you start to become a human being, which changes you from real estate investor into Danny. You just want to be Danny, nothing more. Or you just want to be Brian, nothing more. And something personal about you. You know, when I give my keynote speeches, I like to say, I'm the son of Richard and Joyce Voss from Mount Pleasant, Iowa. That is a game changer instantly, because instead of me saying, hey, you know, I got parents, you got parents, we both got parents, we're alike, they're striving for common ground. I've named my parents. And I've named, I'm Chris, son of Rich and Joyce Voss from Mount Pleasant, Iowa. That changes me completely differently in a way. It begins to make the negotiation more personal. Now let's flash forward to what your original question was. They call up, so you want to buy my property. How much you want to pay? My answer to that is, sounds like you've done some research. Now, that was actually really specifically designed by neuroscience to trigger a response. I've got real estate. What I just used was what we refer to as a label. And I've got real estate people telling me that labels unlock the floodgates for truth telling. It's also the equivalent of rapport-based interviewing that law enforcement is using now these days. And with all the criticism of the harsh interrogation techniques, there was finally a study done comparing the results of harsh interrogation techniques with rapport-based interviewing. He said rapport-based interviewing is the closest thing to giving terrorists a truth serum that law enforcement has. So a label, rapport-based interviewing, and this is us extracting information out of them without giving any in return. On one study, they said it's a truth serum. In real estate, they say it unlocks the floodgates of truth telling. Sounds like you've got something in mind. Sound like you got a price in mind. Sound like you've done your research. That person is not calling me without at least checking the market a little bit. If nothing else, they called their brother-in-law and said, hey, this shark sent me a letter. He's going to try and take my property from me. I'm going to call him up and see what he has in mind. And the brother-in-law is going to say, your property is worth at least $1.5 million. They got some kind of research out there that they're holding on to and they're actually dying to tell you about. But their decision-making is getting in the way and you got to bypass it. And instead of asking them a question, which raises their guard, you just make an observation. Sounds like you've done some research or something to that effect. And if they're going to answer you right off the bat, which they will about 75% of the time, that's what's going to get it out of them.
So is it most important, do you think, to try to extract as much information from that caller to find out maybe how they feel, what their situation is, what their beliefs are? And then with that, how do you use that in this conversation? But it seems to me that you're not really negotiating at this point. You're trying to build a rapport, right? And that's probably the most.
I'm doing both. See, that's why hostage negotiators go so much faster than everybody else. We're gonna build rapport. We're gonna gather information, and we're gonna negotiate simultaneously. It's not just price. I want to simultaneously extract as much information as possible, make the other side feel good about it while they're giving it to me. Get them talking and have them feel really good about the process. The most dangerous negotiation is the one you don't know you're in. I'm going to get that process started sooner than the other side has any idea. I'm going to get.
Oh, sorry. What's a tactic to quickly create rapport with somebody?
Actually, I already gave it to you. Sounds like you've done your research. That's actually also a demonstration of respect. It's a demonstration that the other side is a thinking human being that's probably prepared and is probably thoughtful. It's an appreciation of the fact that they have done research. And it's showing a little bit of insight, taking an educated emotional intelligence guess that you're dealing with somebody who's smart enough to have done research. So that comment is going to, again, it's going to, not only is it going to unlock the floodgates of truth telling, it's going to build the rapport that I want early on through a demonstration of respect and appreciation, even admiration. And it's going to build me to a sort of influence that I need, which is actually trust-based influence, which is the strongest, most resilient form of influence. That's the kind of influence when a problem comes up, and problems are going to come up. One of two things is going to happen. The other side's going to hide it from me till I step on that landmine, or they're going to try to solve it or tell me about it in advance so that I don't get bushwhacked.
Right. So, and when we're when we're talking to these sellers, they always have a price in mind that's 99% of the time more than you're looking to pay. And what might be a way to approach getting them to your price? What would be like the most basic strategies somebody might use to be able to convince another party that this is what we pay, this is probably the best solution for your problem? The issue is, I guess, is that it's not always the best solution to their problem. So in my business, I'm also a real estate broker. So I'll tell them we can either list your property for sale, and there's upside and downside to that, or we could give you the cash price. There's upside and downside to that. A lot of guys, they're not real estate brokers, and they're really just looking to pay cash at their price, and there's not many other options involved. What are some ways to actually get people on board to accept your price and to kind of come off the ledge where they expect to sell a property for market value, even if maybe it needs a lot of repairs, or they're in a tight situation? What would be some of your advice on that aspect of it?
Well, first of all, it's ridiculous what deals people will make if they feel they've been treated fairly. And, most of our offers are empathy, relationship building. So, there's an issue of what's going to guarantee me success and get them to change their price, or what's my best chance of success. Now, the tactical application of empathy has a much higher batting average than logic does, or reasoning, or making a case, or giving them a solid dose of reality. Now, that's not to say that you can't make deals with logic or reasoning or solid doses of reality. It's just that your batting average isn't as high as it should be, and your implementation is always a lot worse. So it's taken into consideration, what can I do if I develop a better relationship with somebody? If I make them feel better about giving me a better deal, do I want them to give me a better deal and be resentful, which then is going to hurt my reputation in the industry, referrals, and it's going to hurt implementation? Or do I want them to give me a better deal and feel really good about how they were treated in the process?
So is part of the empathy, is part of that helping them understand who you are, what your background is, trying to get them emotionally involved and connected with you on a deeper level than just here are the facts, here are the numbers, blah, blah, blah?
There's a certain amount of personalization, but we definitely want to build a two-way empathy bridge here. We definitely want them seeing us as human beings. That's less complicated than most people think. I mean, as soon as I become Chris, son of Richard and Joyce Voss, I'm a long way down the line of where I need to be. They don't need to know how many cities I've lived in. They don't need to know who my favorite sports team is. We don't have to share an affinity for the same sports, or what a lot of people refer to as common ground. Common ground is not a bad thing. I don't want to have to depend upon it to make deals. Where I came from, we had to make deals with people we shared no common ground with: terrorists, kidnappers, killers. Had to establish empathy in a working relationship. We got so good at it at some point in time. One of the things I talk about in my book, a sociopathic murder and rape and terrorist called the negotiator that I coached on the phone about 2 weeks after the hostage escaped. And if the hostage escaped, that meant the terrorist got nothing. Called him on the phone 2 weeks after and said, "Have they promoted you yet? You're really, really good. I don't know what you said to me on the phone that kept me from killing a hostage, but they should promote you." It was a demonstration of respect. And our two people had nothing in common. So as soon as we start demonstrating this respect and creating this two-way empathy bridge, it maximizes my opportunity for success, minimizes the amount of concessions I have to make. Now, in a business deal, I might have to do some high-value trade-offs. I may not be able to get at my target price to begin with. But if I can get anything of what I want through the demonstration of tactical empathy, then I'm saving my monetary concessions or trade-offs only for stuff I have to do. I'm real tight with my money, and I'll give it up, but I'm not giving it up if I don't have to. And that's why we take the empathy approach too, because I don't care what the percentage is. I don't care if it's 5%. I don't care if it's 95%, but it's better than zero of the deals I can make by not moving on any of my terms.
So
one iota.
So Chris, you're in a hostage negotiation. You show up, you start talking to somebody that's really angry, energized. You have nothing in common. How do you connect with somebody like that really quickly? What's the fastest way for you to actually become a human to them and become their friend?
Yeah, well, to start off with, if I introduce myself, all I'm going to say is I'm Chris. Nothing more. I'm not going to say I'm Chris, FBI hostage negotiator, and proceed to trot out my resume. That's all noise. I just need them to know my first name. Then I'm gonna say something that's going to catch them off guard in a good way. And I might say, "Are you okay?" Now, it's not only important the words that I've chosen, but the tone of voice that I use. And I'm going to demonstrate an appreciation for their position. Like a bank robber, I might say, I know it wasn't your plan to get trapped in a bank today, was it? If somebody's selling a house because they're under distress, or a piece of property, whatever it may be, I might say, I'll bet this was not your plan when you first bought this place. Some recognition or appreciation right off the bat. That's instantly what the common ground here is we're both faced with a dilemma that has caused us to talk to each other. Now, you may not like the dilemma or the fact that you're talking to me at all. But if I demonstrate some appreciation for the dilemma that we're both faced with, different aspects of it, common ground has immediately been established.
I was hoping to ask you what your greatest failure or regret in a negotiation is looking back. I don't know if that's something you'd want to touch on, if it's too painful, or if you could share a story with us of something that you really regret doing and a situation that didn't turn out that well and maybe what you learned from it.
I don't know if there's anything, it's hard to say what I regret doing. I'm one of those guys that fear regrets of omission rather than commission. I would much prefer to take a calculated risk and go for it and live with the consequences than I can deal with failing to jump in. And that's not to say that everything worked out great. There's one of the negotiations we talk about in the book was the Burnham Sabero kidnapping in the Philippines. And 2 out of 3 of our last hostages were killed in a botched rescue attempt after we thought the hostages were going to have been released about a month earlier. And through the entirety of that kidnapping, 2 out of 3 of the Americans that were taken in the first place ended up dead. One was murdered early on. Guillermo Sabero was murdered. Martin Burnham was killed about 13 months later in a botched rescue attempt. There have been a variety of Filipinos murdered, released, raped, and released. I mean, it was a long running train wreck. That was the biggest. I hate using the word failure, but it was the ugliest outcome I was ever involved in. And that was what took me to Harvard, because, in our internal after action review, I knew that I'd done everything that we could do, that we knew how to do at the time. And I knew that it wasn't enough. And that's when I started looking outside of hostage negotiation for us to get better. So it's not a direct answer to your question, but I've had situations go bad. They're a minority, But if you're in the hostage business long enough, then things go bad.
That's part of the business, right?
Yeah.
And how about your greatest success? Is there something you look back on and you were just like, it really puts a smile on your face when you think back on it?
Well, there were two, almost back to back. Not, when we started looking back at what we did in the Burnham-Sabero case, it was my idea to change our strategy and improve for life. We did it as a team internally, the guys that I was working with in a crisis negotiation unit. But it was my idea, and I said, guys, am I smoking drugs here? What am I doing? Am I crazy? And my partners, Chuck Regini in particular, it's like, no, you're on the right track. So the very next 2 kidnappings, we applied this new approach to, with a lot of pushback from the other hostage negotiators that we were involved with. The first one, the hostage escaped, and we found out afterwards it was our strategy that opened the door and helped create the opportunity for escape. And then we turn around, we're back in the Philippines on a criminal kidnapping just a couple months after that, and our overall strategy led to a rescue. And I can remember both of those moments. I remember when I got the call that Pepe had escaped in Ecuador. I remember just being, oh my God, it's fantastic. It's a tremendous feeling. And then when Alistair Onling Swan was rescued in the Philippines, which, by the way, was the second rescue attempt in that case, and the first rescue attempt on him missed the stronghold where he was being held by so far, because we didn't know where he was being held. The Filipino police missed it by so far, the hostage taker didn't even know there'd been an attempted rescue attempt. So when they went out the second time, I had no idea what was going to happen. When I was told that Alistair Onling Swan was rescued, then I was ecstatic over that, and it was our strategy that helped lead to the rescue.
Yeah. Are you still working as a hostage negotiator? Or have you gone
It's
on
all business. I am all business all the time these days. Nothing but business negotiation.
Nice. Oh, hey, I noted that you talk about silence, and silence means something different to different personality types.
Yeah.
Could you touch on that really quick for us? I thought that was a pretty interesting comment.
It is so crazy because there are three types, and we've got the data that supports the contention that the world breaks pretty evenly into 3 types: fight, flight, make friends. So when there's silence in a negotiation with a fight type, and I'm the natural born fighter, the natural born assertive. I never missed the opportunity to engage in a confrontation. If there's silence, I think, you went silent because you want to hear more from me. You want me to make my case. You want me to keep going. The flight type is the analyst. Analysts are shrewd guys. They do not engage in conflict unless it's a last resort. Instead of, me, the fight type, conflict is my first resort. The analysts, they go silent when they want to think. So, you got an assertive and an analyst talking to each other, and the analyst is going silent because he's very thoughtful. He thinks things through. He's very analytical. That's why we call him analyst. Analyst is going silent to think, and the assertive is thinking like, oh, he went silent because he wants me to talk some more. And then the third type, the make friends type, when they go silent because they value communication in the relationship. And so giving the silent treatment to them is the meanest they could be, because failing to communicate with you is how they signal fury, not just anger, but if the make friends type, if they hate you, they're going to go dead silent. So imagine them talking to an analyst. The analyst is going silent because they want to think, and the make friends type is thinking like, oh my God, they're furious. I need to talk some more to fix the relationship. And the analyst is thinking like, would you please just shut up? I like you enough. Just shut up for 2 seconds. So that's just on the issue of going silent and how vastly differently the 3 types interpret it.
And so how do you use that practically in a negotiation?
Well, the first thing is to have a clear feeling of yourself of your reaction to silence. And then to realize that 2 out of 3 times when you go silent, the other person is going to start talking some more and give you lots more valuable information. So I need the information from you. I need you to give me a data download. I am information hungry in my negotiation, in particular, the information that only you can give me. So if I shut up, 2 out of 3 people on the other side of the table are now going to start dumping more great intel on me that I can use to calibrate whether or not I'm on a right track, where the obstacles are, and where the better deal is. Now, the person, when I go silent, who also shuts up, now I've actually just gathered more information, because if there was any doubt in my mind as to whether or not the other side was an analyst, I now know that they are. I know they're very thoughtful, and I know that they are actually appreciative of the time to think. And me taking the time to shut up is going to be something that at some level they're very grateful for. So I've actually just built the relationship even better with that person who was hoping I would shut up.
We'll get a phone call from a seller, and you're going to gather information, have a conversation, and then you're going to leave the conversation and you're going to end it. And it seems to me that how you end with somebody on the telephone is critical to setting up follow-up appointments and phone calls. And they're going to leaves a little bit of energy, I guess, on how you end it. Have you given that any thought, like when you're going to hang up the phone call with a hostage and how you're going to set up the next meeting and things like that so that they look forward to it, and so it's a little easier to start up where you kind of left off?
Yeah, it's actually the first thing we think about. The last impression is a lasting impression, so your gut instincts are great. You can get away with a mediocre first impression. You can't get away with a mediocre last impression. People who think that the first impression is the most important are dead wrong, because they do not pay enough attention to the last impression, because they made a great first impression. They think they're golden. So the last impression is a lasting impression. And so I will have gone into the interaction before I picked up the phone. I already know how I want to end it. I want to say something that's not only positive, but that demonstrates appreciation and respect for the other person, and it's not spin. Now, they will not have gotten on the phone with me at all unless they were hoping they could make a good deal, that they were hoping that we could be successful together. So that may well be my last line. Look, I want you to know that I know you got on this phone hoping you could make a good deal and that we could be successful together. And I want you to know in the interim that I hope we can make a great deal that we're both happy with also. That's not a commitment in any way, shape, or form, but those will be the words that ring in their ears every single time they call that conversation up in their head. The last impression is a lasting impression. It goes for phone calls, it goes for emails. And it's the most often screwed up impression that people do, because they think if they open well, that it doesn't matter how they close.
Right. And so you're kind of looking towards that conclusion where everybody gets what they need or want. And that's kind of the last thing you leave with them, kind of a little bit of hope, I guess.
Well, yeah, it's emotional needs and wants and appreciations and visions of what success looks like in the future. So I just know that I need to end on a positive emotional note. If I have anything positive I want to say, if I know something good about them, if I want to congratulate them on their family, if there's anything, I always move that to the last, because that's how I want to finish the conversations.
Right. So, Chris, what are you currently doing today? What's your business and your life look like? And maybe you could share with the listeners how they can learn more about you and what you're up to.
Yeah, we are rocking it. My company is helping more people make good deals, and as much as anything else, get out of bad deals. There's I know there's a saying in sales that the sin is not getting the sale. The sin is taking a long time to not get the sale. Like, we help people understand real quick up front whether the other side is on a fishing expedition or whether or not they're serious. Because if they're on a fishing expedition, we want you to close that positively and get out of it so you can get onto a serious deal. So I do a lot of keynotes and a lot of conferences, real estate conferences, sales conferences. We're actually working on putting together our own commercial real estate conference in November, I think is when we're going to do it. But I'm at residential real estate conferences on a regular basis too, helping people understand these ideas. We've got some online training that we're doing. We coach people that are in negotiations, and we do a lot of advising both on a company level and on an individual level. We were on a Skype call earlier with a construction company in England. We're coaching deals from England to Vietnam, across the world. And we're having a great time. It's cool because this application of emotional intelligence applies to everybody and every kind of transaction. And it is the distinctive competitive advantage. The application of emotional intelligence is not only phenomenally powerful, but so few people are doing it. As soon as you start doing it, your competitive advantages start to put you ahead of everybody else. Best way to keep in touch with us? We put out a weekly newsletter. It's short and sweet. A lot of people love it as a supplement to the book, which is Never Split the Difference. The book's on Amazon. That's where I buy my books. I buy them myself on Amazon because the price is good. And we put out a weekly short, sweet newsletter on Tuesday mornings. It's called The Edge. It's complimentary. It's one of a number of things that we do for free. We put a fair amount of free content out there. And if I may, I'll share with how to sign up for The Edge. You send a text message. Simplest, shortest, sweetest way is our text to sign up function. You send a text message, FBI Empathy, all one word. Don't let your spell check put a space in between it. Make it 2 words. FBI Empathy, you send that message to 22828. And that number again is 22828. 22828. 22828. And you get a response back. It signs you up for The Edge. The Edge is the gateway to everything we have. When you click on an article, it takes you to the website, and there's all kinds of stuff. There's also announcements of upcoming training that we're doing in different places. We got some training coming up in Dallas in September. We're going to be in Los Angeles in November. We're going to be in Boston in December.
That's all the time we have for this edition of the show. You can learn more about Chris Voss by going to his website, blackswanltd.com. Be sure to rate the podcast at Apple Podcasts, and we'll see you next week.